Good morning. It is Thursday, June 1st. This is a special meeting of the Darien Board of Education Communications Committee. Our next meeting is scheduled for, June 23rd at 8:30 a.m. Turn it over to Dr.
Be determined.
Yeah. Be here in 5 minutes that date.
Morning for those here this morning. So just in general here, we're revisiting.
Alan, put your mic in.
Tilt your mic down to you. Great.
So the first agenda item has is revisiting the survey that we administered. We tried to adhere to the timeline here of getting the surveys back. So we'll just proceed through the agenda items as they're listed here. We have done a little bit of an analysis of it, and all in fairness to the subcommittee, they have not had an awful lot of time to digest it, but we're moving forward with presenting it this morning just to get it on the table, and we may need a wee bit more time to reflect on it. But we have some takeaways. I want to thank Marge for organizing this and for the board's feedback in the design of it. And so it's been administered. And we had over 400 responses from the parents and 182 from our staff. And I'd be happy to have Mark sort of talk to the issues in the communication that was sent out. We did try to summarize some of it for the board. We have, well, actually, I'll just let Mark just talk about the nature completely because she can do that.
So we just highlighted the questions as it says in the memo where the strongly agree and agree were less than 50% because those seem to be areas of concern. And then it was perhaps a tiny bit subjective in the narratives, but I tried to cull through things that related to communications, but that appeared multiple times. That's really the extent of the analysis.
We did, we just listed every comment, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, or whether it was on the mark, off the mark, or whatever. We Mark pulled just general themes or otherwise, but anybody who submitted anything, whether, no matter what we thought about it, we put it back.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we did this in a very quick time frame too, which was great so that we have some results to look at. But thank you to all the people who did participate, staff and community members. I think that's a pretty good response, the amount of answers that we got. And to Dr. Adley's point, I appreciate that we did include all the comments here in the report. And for those that were a little more off the mark at times, I think it's still, there's value in looking at what is relevant to communications specifically and some of the, more colorful comments. So thank you for that. And I definitely agree that there are some themes that came out of the data, both the kind of multiple choice questions, that's not what I mean, but you know what I mean, and the open-ended questions. So I have spent some time with it. I'm sure you guys spent a few minutes with it, but yes, it was a lot of information to get through in a quick amount of time. And I'm hoping that we can spend more time with it between now and our next meeting and look at it in connection with our kind of massive spreadsheet of our inventory of communications to see anything else that rises to the surface to carry forward. I have a few other observations I was going to share, but I'll open it up if you guys have anything you want to jump in with first.
Why don't you go first?
Okay.
And then
I think, and forgive me if any of these are captured here, definitely we have website work to do. I think that's pretty clear across the board. And I think there's some interesting information in here regarding how people get their information. It generally seems that if it's something you need to know critically, people want to get a text message. But if it's something informational that you maybe want to go back to, people want to get an email, and we might want to look in the future at ways that people can design that a little more for themselves, what you opt into and how you receive it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you can choose your options for getting informed about weather days in Aspen. Is that right? Like it goes everywhere that you can. Does it? Okay, because I feel like I used to get like 7 phone calls and now I don't anymore, but maybe I'm mistaken. I'll look into that. The idea of having messages stand out, noticing that things are from the district. I thought we heard that a little bit from both staff and community. And I'm not sure exactly how we improve on that. So maybe we think about that a little bit more. I do know that at times you get an email and it's unclear who the email's from, or it's sent by someone on behalf of someone else, which might mean it gets a little lost in your inbox. So I thought that was something we might want to look at a little more. And then this concept of people being time starved, which I think we can all appreciate, but the amount of information we get is hard to manage at times, but also the amount of information that needs to be gotten out is hard to manage, excuse me, at times. So I think we need to consider what our audience is fielding and receiving, but I think we also probably need to talk a little bit as well about how things are being responded to. I don't think we have a hard and fast 24-hour rule anymore, but I also don't know that 24 hours is reasonable anymore. So I just want to capture that as something we look at as we move forward. I think those were my big ones for now. Anybody have anything else?
I just note that there's some things here, Marge maybe can talk to some of them that they need to clarify, but some of them are on both lists,
Mhm.
right? Both of the community and the staff, and even within, they've named them as a sort of a strength and a weakness sometimes. So if you're wondering, like, that seems a wee bit of a conundrum. Well, it is a wee bit because it was listed as such. So I just want to name that. I don't know if you want to, if there's any clarification on any of these under the community, either the observations of the multiple choice sort of part of it and the narratives of any of those that you want to speak to, or do you want us to name these at the moment other than they're in the memorandum? Or
We can walk through them, sure. These 8 points, do you mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
just to name them quickly. If there's any clarification, Marge, would you just walk through those? just
Sure,
real
from the
quickly?
community survey, people wanted more highlights of student successes in the narratives. People sometimes also wanted failures. I'm not sure how we would do that, but also more highlight of staff successes. Satisfaction with the website was an issue with multiple people. Again, which Mrs. Beth said, messages catching the recipient's attention. Both groups wanted more opportunities to engage with the administration, and a lot of them said central office. I don't think they have a problem engaging with their school administration, and opportunities to engage with the board. There were some who questioned respect of dissenting opinions, and the use of social media was a concern. But honestly, that when you look at the question, rank how you value, it's hard to tell whether people really want more social media or, so I don't know that question was crafted as well as it could have been.
We might need to probe that,
Yeah.
right, when we get
With
into
focus
focus groups. Yeah, I caught that too. The highlighting non-successes, for lack of a
Well,
better
you saw
term.
those in the comments, right? That was-
Yes. That's something to think about. And that may just be people craving more information. It doesn't just have to be, the results of a athletic competition. It could be, we're rolling out the new K-3 cricket, whatever, I'm making things up, but
Sure.
it could be something along those lines. Sorry, I didn't mention this one. Another point that I thought was interesting, someone made the point that there is a increased importance on our communication in today's world because there's less local coverage of what goes on as our papers and our media vehicles are less local these days. And that I just thought was noteworthy because it's true and it puts more onus on us collectively. Do you want to keep
Can I
going?
keep going?
I don't know whether you need the narratives because I think we've covered things that are in the narratives, except that some people complained about Aspen in both groups, that it's a clunky system. And then staff, again, they would like to highlight staff successes. They find things difficult to find on the website, which we've heard before, and we've tried to fix that, but it's not where it should be. Messages catching attention, the opportunities to engage with administration and the board respective communications. And staff, some staff felt that communications are not open and transparent.
Can you tickle that one a little more? The last number 7.
So I didn't even see that reflected so much in the comments. Did you, Julie? I
No.
think that sometimes perhaps it's a timeliness issue. Sometimes it's that people don't like what the communication is more than it not being open and transparent. So I think if we have some focus groups with the staff, we should ask more about that.
I agree. I would agree. I do. The
Yeah.
best I could tease out was the timeliness of it. People feeling like something might get sprung on them too late in the game and they're not prepared, or they had something else prepared, et cetera. But I think, yeah, we
Right,
can
because
dig in.
the narrative about curriculum development and implementation that they need, I mean, that's hard to understand because it's rolled out in professional development. So I think, again, we should probe.
Mhm. All right, thank you. Dennis, anything from you?
No, I get, well, maybe. I guess the question I have is when they keep saying opportunities to engage with board and administration, are there more specifics or is that something we have to pull out of a focus group? Because it seems like both parents and staffs highlighted both of those.
So,
Go ahead.
so I saw some of those comments standing in again. I had a chance to, go through this in detail, but I think it's pretty interesting. Every one of our meetings is public. Every one of our meetings allows public comment, but I think what some of the comments unearthed, and it's criticism I've heard, not only from the public, but like RTM members, is there's a limited opportunity in the meetings to engage in back and forth kind of conversations, Q&A, that sort of thing. Now, what I think we have to do a better job of doing is informing the public that, public meetings have to follow an agenda, and there's some Freedom of Information Act issues that we have to be careful and aligned with. But receiving that information is pretty important because maybe we can create a town hall or some sort of event in which we can communicate in a more open forum. But I also remind folks that our emails and I believe phone numbers are available to every single constituent, and the opportunity to share voices and ask questions and have a back and forth can certainly be done with any and all board members at any time. And that is easier to engage. Clearly, only, we can't represent the views of the board, but we can, share our views amongst constituents and fellow elected officials on matters. So I think, bottom line, we have to do a better job at informing, ways of communicating. One simple way is also, I think there's no quick link to just email the Board of Ed in general, right? And I've seen that in other towns and other committees. And I just email Park and Rec, and putting the whatever 8 names on is a chore in a way. So maybe we can do a quick link like that. But do a better job of informing the public in ways that they can communicate back and forth. The other thing that struck me is dissenting opinions and not listening. And we've heard that criticism publicly, right, Dennis? I think you called it out during the budget process.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, at the time we pushed back, and I think we have to do a better job of communicating. Well, we're listening, and we might not come to the same conclusion, as that dissenting opinion, if you will, or our opinions dissenting. And, we can't agree with everybody throughout our constituency, but as representatives, we're trying the best way to communicate what we're trying to do up here, and represent, a broad range of our constituents. And I think people also have to remember that we're not only representing, administration or teachers or parents, we have a wide swath of people that we have to represent. So I think, from a communication standpoint, we can do a better job of kind of sharing that philosophy and that view.
Thank you. I have a couple more thoughts on that, but I'm going to hold them until we talk about recommendations we might make for board goals for next year. That's okay.
Sorry, probably jumped ahead a little on that.
No, that's okay.
So I think that as with any data set, it causes you to ask more questions.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this in itself can stand alone, but it also serves, as Marge says, as an opportunity for focus groups to, I'll take an example of the website. I could go now to technology and say, feedback from the staff and the community is about the website. Well, they'll understandably say, well, what parts of it, or what is it we're not doing? So it allows opportunities both from our side and also with our constituents here to flesh out what do we mean by that, or any other question that merits further exploration. So I think it'll help frame some of the discussion. It won't prevent other discussions taking place, but it'll help inform, I think, some of those.
Makes sense.
Most of my comments are similar, that they really have to do with moving forward. But I would say Thank you. I found this very helpful. I'm very glad that we did it.
Okay.
It was fantastic just to be able to synthesize sort of areas where we want to focus and see a lot of different points of view on that. There are some things we already knew, but it's helpful to see that, you know, they really are important. I think just quickly on the highlight student successes, maybe we want to change the language to highlight student experience. And that way we maybe capture more broadly what we mean. You know, for staff, I think that could be a little different. We could talk about it, but anyway, I'll stop there just because I think most of what I would be interested in involves board goals, but I do think it makes it clear that exploring some of our communication as a district, taking a look at how we interact as a board, understanding that we do have a lot of structures in place that are, you know, we have to work around, but we're also called to be ambassadors. I don't know why that's making noise, sorry. For the district, that there's, you know, there's a place maybe for the public, which there always is, to better understand how the board functions, but then to take a look at how that's working in today's world. I also think that on that question of social media, I think that's an area where, aside from the policy that's coming up in policy shortly, which has to do with staff use of social media, I think we should move forward with that. But I think there are so many questions about social media and how healthy it is or isn't, and how much we want to encourage of it. I think it could be worthwhile for this committee to take on some questions of whether or not it is really a vehicle that we want to use in a meaningful way. I think we already are in part, but you know, it's pretty clear from parents, again, it's worth talking about in the focus group, but it's pretty clear from parents that they're using email. They want us to better use the website, and they're using phone and text. And so I think we should be thoughtful, not only about how to use it, but if we should use it and when.
Or how it complements existing communication, right? Maybe you don't want to become a discussion forum, but more of a banner forum to say, you know, this email went out, and it will immediately inform people who use social media within their news feeds, but not engage, not allow the engagement of commentary or something like that. So just to avoid, you know, kind of destructive nature that social media can have. And it's not our, you know, goal to get involved in social media discussions, I guess, as a board. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll have to have some social media conversations moving forward. I don't know that in this day and age, we can not use social media. I think we'll have to talk about how to do that. And there are some best practices around
Sure.
that we can look at and discuss moving forward.
You know, one of the things I don't want to just ignore in the written commentary, there's a lot of discussions around SEL and curriculum and, you know, not directly related to communication, but it raised eyebrows in that perhaps we're not doing a good enough job of informing our, you know, parent community, because it seems like mostly from the parent community of kind of what we are doing as a district and within the curriculum and how that kind of overlays everything else we're doing. So, you know, it's not, again, directly related to communications, but maybe it shows a little gap in terms of the way we're informing folks.
Right.
You know, I guess also it's some, without disparaging, you know, some like commentary, it seems like a lot of people want to be spoon-fed some things, you know, a lot more push. But again, I mean, everything we do based on FOIA, I mean, we have to post when our meetings are within 24 hours in advance, and typically they're well in advance. I mean, we have a regular meeting schedule posted even. You know, committee meetings are also posted and televised, and the content in which we are discussing, if not posted before the meeting, is posted shortly thereafter. So, you know, I think meeting the expectation that we, again, spoon feed's probably a little too tough of a term, but or simple of a term anyway. You know, it's not our role to push everything that we do as well. I mean, people have to pay attention as well. And that was one of the kind of themes we've discussed in the budget cycle as well.
Well, and for example, we did just recently have at the middle school a parent information session on SEL with Dr. Dad and Mrs. Stroller, and maybe people missed it because they get so much information. But I attended, and there was a nice audience there, but it wasn't incredibly well attended. But if that's a topic of great concern, I would have expected more people in the room, hopefully people were able to watch it after the fact. I know that there is no perfect time frame that fits everyone's schedule. So
Do we
I
tape it,
acknowledge
though? Like,
that.
Is that?
it
is
was
okay, so then-
recorded. The recording was turned off before the Q&A, but yes, and that video is available. But there's a lot out there, and it is possible that people miss when things are happening. So I think we can look at ways to optimize that.
Yeah, and optimize, places that people can access to find those videos.
Yep. I believe you sent that recording out in
Yes.
your weekly newsletter,
Yeah, cool.
your weekly email, excuse me.
Actually, in addition to the board wanting something on mental health and so on, that was in direct response to some going back to SEL, because we had previously done a whole SEL presentation in all the schools. So we did it again.
Sure, yeah.
In response to some picking up just some people who maybe didn't follow that process, or actually the recency effect, which also overlays contextually anything you give, when you give it, time of year you give it, what is going on in a certain organization at a particular time. So all of those things are contextually important too.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Just was curious, while I know 400 is a good number for parents, do we know kind of what the open rate of your email was? And what were we expecting? Do we have a sense of how many people, like what the divisor would be there?
Well, as long as we get about 20% of the teaching staff, I think that's probably useful. We've got over 4,600 kids and stuff in the district. I think this was 400 from the
A little over 400.
400 from the parent community. So I think that's a reasonable response.
I do agree. I would love to get an idea on some click-through rates, which I think probably shouldn't be that hard to get.
I'll ask.
For Dr. Adley's weekly, and there might be a few that we might want to put together. I'm curious, there are some departmental newsletters that go out on a quarterly or biannual basis. I think it would be valuable to get that information pulled together as another data point, and I'd be happy to follow up with a couple examples of the things I'm thinking about, if that's helpful.
Well, it might just be useful as like we're going to end up generating
Right.
those as part of the next level of the work, I would think.
Exactly. All right, cool. Thank you. Anything else before we move on? All right. So that takes us to policies. Is that where we are?
I think it's
think we're goals,
the
right?
inventory of the spreadsheet. Communication
Oh,
plan.
right.
Oh, spreadsheet.
Which we discussed at our last meeting, right? So now I think the idea is to marry those two a little bit, to spend some time looking at those to help find any other holes, any other areas we want to explore in focus groups or in advance of focus group to prepare for the focus groups, and maybe look at that for our next meeting. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So in the memorandum, what I tried to do here, just so as we capture what the big takeaways were from the last time, so that this has not been, you don't need to actually drill through these spreadsheets. They haven't been revised since the last time we spoke, but I wanted to capture the things that the board said at that particular meeting, or the committee here said at that particular time, were the other things to include or the takeaways from it. So that's going to be this document is going to continue to be a data point when we get the focus groups back. This is all going to be part of and then we're going to have to refine what we actually do want in that. Is the committee happy enough with what we captured, or actually it's 1, 2, 3, should be 1, 2, 3, 4. But I'll just name them for people here. There are many and varied district communications happening. Most communications are informative and tend to be one directional, the majority of them. There's limited social media presence again. And we should include some high level sort of communications about athletic and club communications, and it was up to me to sort of thread that needle as to how many, and just try and capture the idea of that.
Some examples
Yes.
for the spreadsheet. Yep, agreed. I think that captures what I had from the discussion.
Yeah, best practices, basically.
Excellent. Policies?
Marge, do you want to just do the policies there?
Well, these are samples.
Yes,
that
thank you to Jill for pulling these together and sharing them with us.
Jill and Dr. Abbey had contacted Gabe, and, I think that we're wondering where the committee wants to go with policies. Some of them I feel like are problematic potentially, but we would of course have Shipman and Goodwin review.
Yes. And have we asked Shipman and Goodwin if they have
They
a,
don't.
they don't? Okay, thank you. So these were interesting. I thought there was some interesting stuff in there. I agree with you. Some of them would be problematic. Some of them are probably a little dated in the world of social networking, as they referred to it in some of these policies. 5 years is a huge time frame, so it's a different world than 2018. But I thought there were some interesting points that came out of here. I would say my overall takeaway is I don't think we're ready just yet to go to the board and recommend that something be sent to policy yet to craft something, but I open it up for agreement or disagreement.
The one thing I would say is like, to what extent are we trying to, if we want to do policy, what's the scope of that? Because there's things in here that go, you could continue with these, like, so you can have a sort of general statement, a general guideline, or a general direction from the board. Then you get into all levels of social media, and so we can keep going. So they're just, collectively, we need to come up with, do we want to make a general statement type thing? That's the wrong term, I think, but you know what I'm talking about, as opposed to this committee could address, for instance, we want to take on social media. Okay, independently, we could take that on. But when we talk about the communications, and we'll have to give a bit of guidance in this too, or when we talk about communication policy, what do we really mean? Like, what do we, sounds easy, but like, what is it?
Well, and there's already policy that exists that touches upon all this, right? I mean,
Some of it.
A little bit.
It's like, so social media doesn't cover, for example, board social media. So some of this.
no, I know,
touches on-
that's
Go
not
ahead.
where I was going,
Go
just
ahead.
touches upon it, right? Not all of it, not in comprehensive nature, so. And the policy committee is looking at some of,
Social media this week, right? Or next week.
So I think that we're going to look only at some technical revisions. We received some suggestions, but Shipman hasn't had for more substantive revisions. Thank you. But Shipman doesn't have the time to do it before our meeting.
Okay.
so I almost feel like should wait to see what kind of flows out of there
Policy.
first.
Mhm.
And then if we need to, encourage embellishment around some communications policy, then do a little work and
Yes.
go back to the
Not get
board
ahead
and-
of that.
Yeah.
But the other piece I think that's important is we made a decision as a board to not, to stick pretty closely to just recommended policies and not to have many policies that were more broad-based and philosophical and impossible to enforce in nature. So, I think that there's two schools of thought. So I think we as a committee want to consider that. Do we want to encode in policy things that are philosophical? Is policy the right place to encode some of these things? I mean, for example, some of the email use. Like, it would be useful for any incoming board member to have an understanding of how we use email, to understand that it's public. Is it appropriate to put that in an onboarding document and post it on the website so the public is also aware, but it isn't necessarily captured in policy? So I think those are some things we can look at too.
That'd be guidelines, right? In a way, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think there's some stuff that's at a lower level that is in bylaws in some of the examples we found, but that maybe doesn't need to be captured at the policy level, but it's helpful for just a common understanding of some of the
Yeah,
things.
the
that we
perfect
do.
example is being a board member. You don't speak for the board, but you also want to share your opinion with folks when they email
Right.
or
Right.
call you.
Right.
So, yeah, I think creating some guidelines eventually that don't
Yes.
set in stone policy. And Cape, gives you a lot. I remember,
Yes.
being a new board member and understanding kind of your role. So
Yep.
Yes.
That is
maybe
very
we can
helpful.
kind of just focus on the communications aspect of that and use them as guidelines and then
Mhm.
bring that to the board for, acceptance, if you will.
Board communication to staff, just sort of capturing what that relationship looks like. If you're out in public, I thought it was helpful, the three things. You are going to run into staff socially because you are, but I'm on page something, but it's 93B, bylaws of the board, commitment to democratic principles in relation to community,
yeah,
staff,
yeah.
students, social interaction. It sets forth, 3 concepts that would be really things that you can't engage on. And again, whether we decide to capture that in policy or whether we want to just sort of use that as training materials, I think that's helpful information for board members to have before they think about, as they think about how they go out and interact.
Mhm.
So I think maybe the next step is to go through some of this and decide what kind of information we just might want to capture, and then figure out, excuse me, where we might want to locate that, because I think a lot of this doesn't sit at the policy level.
Correct.
I would agree with that. I would also say, I think that these examples include reference to some things that we aren't resourced for right now. A community relations program, for example. There's quite a bit of reference to press releases and the dissemination of information prior to and post meetings, which I don't think we have the bandwidth to be putting these communications together right now. So, but I thought it was interesting to see them mentioned. I also, I'm not sure that they belong in policy, but so I agree with the points there. Dennis, anything from you?
No, you guys have covered most of it, I think.
There are some areas where I feel like we might want to flesh some things out. So like under the bylaws of the board public statement, it talks, we have in our policy basically that, the board chair is the spokesperson for the board. But this talks about communication being a concurrent responsibility of the Board of Education and the superintendent of schools, and we really function more that way. So that's an area where I think for clarity's sake, yes, if something is being messaged on behalf of the board, technically the board chair is the board spokesperson, but that is a shared responsibility, and it may be helpful to make sure that our policy reflects that. I'm not saying we have to, but I thought that paragraph was interesting and looked a lot like what we do. So again, I think it's worth just going through, highlighting a few things that we want to talk further about, and then trying to deciding if there's a place for it or not.
Okay, and maybe marrying that with what we see from the policy committee in the
Yes.
coming policy committee meeting discussions.
So I'm
Capture.
Yeah.
just thinking out loud of, typically we might not give policy or any other committee complete direction, right?
Yes.
So like what, sort of like talking out like what comes first here, how much scope, other than saying we would like or not like to revisit the communications committee, how our communications, anything about communications, what invariably would it end up look like, and giving them feedback? What would that feedback actually potentially even look like?
We're not releasing anything to communicate as to policy at this time. So
Right.
there is no direction for
Correct.
policy at this time. So I think that it's this committee's job to take a look at what's here, identify if there are areas we might want to consider further. And then we take a look at what we think next steps are. Some of that might be communication with
Alright.
policy. Some of it might need to go somewhere else. I mean, a little bit like that great spreadsheet you did where we identified all the topics and then we talked about where we thought it should go. Maybe that's a little bit of what we want to produce as a next step.
So then this item probably should
Remain.
well, I would say it would remain off it until we actually come back with some ideas as to
Oh, yeah,
I would agree.
what the.
absolutely.
Yes.
To answer your
Mhm.
question.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're not, yeah.
Yes,
You agree, Dennis?
Yes, totally.
yes. And we can decide what we think is an appropriate timeline. I mean, arguably, we could all go through it in time for the next month, but how does that sit relative to some of the other things the committee might need to be
Right.
doing at this
Agreed.
time?
It may not be something we want to revisit at the end of this month. It might be for a later.
It could be a board goal going into the next year.
Yeah.
The timeframe.
Yep.
Okay, so. All right. Goals and objectives.
So I think this committee was talking about the concept of including a goal of the board goals around communication, the potential to that. And if not, that's okay too. All I've done here is listed what we currently have as the board goal, just as an idea, and also what it says in the strategic plan around communication. So that's just a frame. I'm not suggesting anything here at this particular point. I think the purpose of this agenda was to have a discussion. I think was to give a wee bit of guidance. Do you want me as a superintendent, also as administration, to bring back a goal on communications? And is there anything in nature you want to sort of like
See,
a wee bit of color about that?
Mhm.
So we don't have to do that now, but I think that's why the agenda was on it.
can I ask, when are we discussing goals and strategic plan? Or did we bump it up before
Yeah.
July?
Yes, yes.
The
I think
the last meeting in
It's the
June.
last meeting.
Last meeting, thank you. Okay, I didn't have that.
So that gives us this committee meeting in the next,
Okay, that's great.
barely the next, but
Right. Quick turnaround for the next, if we're trying to turn something around. Thank you. I think it would be helpful, I think, to put a draft together for discussion, and to get the ball rolling. I think, when you look at our goal for this year, I think we've pat ourselves on the back. I think we've done a good job of covering most of the strategic work listed. There are a few things I'd like us to think about for next year, and open, of course, to other input, but I think we're still working on enhancing board and district communications. So I think that's still going in the right direction. I think that the provide continuity of meeting and engagement with community could use some massaging. I think we might want to look at talking about variety of how we engage with the community. What I mean by that is, do we need to get out of the boardroom? These are examples to illustrate the point. Do we want to consider going back to having board members assigned responsibility for covering different schools? Ways to get us a little more engaged visibly and informationally with the district, with staff, with community. So I think something that gets us to that. Community coffees, or a town hall, those, again, these are examples to illustrate my point. I'm not necessarily pushing any of those examples, but ways to get out of the boardroom. Celebrating student and staff achievements. It does sound, as we talked about, like we need some more on staff. And the mention about a little less on achievement, which I get, but I also don't get. So I know where you're going with that.
we just can rename that experience.
Yes, we can rename that experience, but I think maybe beyond just student experience, maybe we want to think about in a broader sense, what kind of messaging are we getting out into the community about what we're doing as a district? An example would be as Ox Ridge comes online in the fall and the new cafeteria is focused on sustainability, returning to reusables and no single-use waste. We should make hay out of things like that. That's good stuff that we're doing. And hopefully that's something that will roll out more broadly and we can be an example to other districts. So maybe that's a separate point than highlighting student and staff and community experience, but I think we want room for something like that, or let's at least consider it. I also think we'll probably need next year to be talking about identifying what resources we need to be able to optimize our communication ability as a district, or optimize our communications. And yes, working collaboratively with policy. I don't think we're ready for that just yet, but I think that's something that we want to keep on the table for if or when we get there. Anybody have any other thoughts or any questions on that stuff?
I think we want to directly name streamlining communication. I'll say, so for example, I've now attended, having moved around a little bit, 5 schools in the district. I really like the way Hinley does it now. All communication is from the principal all the time. I do occasionally get communication from the PTOs on PTO business, but communication comes from the principal. That puts accountability on the principal's desk. I like that simply because, for that very reason, it's regular. It puts accountability. She does celebrate students, and she is truly celebrating the student experience. We'll get pictures of of kids in the library or kids eating outside, or, and I'm not saying that every school has to do exactly what she's doing, but as an example, I think looking at what type of communication comes directly from district staff and ensuring that things that belong to the district come from the district is one aspect of streamlining communication. There were some technical things, right? Like, don't have the double link that we talked about here. But I think explicitly calling that out, looking at streamlining and maybe streamline's not the best word, but something like that. I think, we're continuing that discussion. We're going to be talking about doing focus groups. I think we have identified that there's some discussion the board could be having, whether we do it in a board meeting or at a retreat. The communications committee could probably lead some discussion with the full board about how we communicate as a board, how we interact as a board. So anyway, and I think maybe I would separate those. We have sort of continuing the discussion, continuing to research, and those are the focus groups and things like that. And then we have looking at sort of how to broaden board presence, maybe as a separate goal.
So Justin, those are all good sentiments and are helpful. In the general direction of the board goal, what I hear.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what my question is, let me be direct. Do you want to be sort of general like that and change some of the strategies and objectives under it? Or do you have a feeling, I actually think, not godly, that the board goal should be more specific than that? So I guess that's my question. Do you want to see
Yes.
the specificity through the actions and the work?
All of it.
Or
Me too. Yes and yes. I
Yeah.
do think the goal could be more specific. I want it to be a bit more actionable than just enhancing communications, which is absolutely what we're trying to do. But I think we should beef it up.
No, it is helpful. I just have to think about as soon as you sort of beef it up or be more specific, now you're focusing on something, which is fine. But it's not just going to be focusing on communication, it's going to be focusing on some aspect of it then. So I have to give some creative thought to what that is, because I think everybody would have a lot of things they want to focus on in communication. But okay, that's,
Right.
I'm asking for feedback. That's what I'm getting.
And we may decide we don't like that. We
Yeah, I'm
want
sure
it to
you-
be more specific, to be fair.
Yeah, we may back it up after we see it.
But I think it would be helpful to go through that exercise. Anyone have anything else on that topic?
Just trying to think sort of if we roll it up, what that really looks like. We don't have to belabor it, but
That's okay. No, you've given me enough.
okay,
I think I've got enough
to work with. Okay.
For a draft.
to confuse me further. I think I'm good.
Excellent. And
I mean, we don't have to have this, I think I'm a little hesitant, sorry, about, I think we need to have some interactions with the focus groups to understand exactly what people are saying, and then to frame our board goals and objectives. And that I think we need to leave it somewhat broad, and then maybe we have to revisit it and go back as we're working on our plan. Because I'm not sure we're going to have this buttoned up by the end of June.
I would agree. So I think the goal is sort of two-pronged. It involves streamlining where we can begin to do that. Again, that may not be the correct word, but and then there's a piece of it that involves continuing to do the legwork. And so I think there are probably some, if we just look through the survey and the large tables, there's probably some areas that jump out at us where we can begin to do some work. But I would agree with you, Dennis, that we want to also, part of the work is continuing to engage on the topic of communication.
There's still due diligence to be had or made.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
And that will further guide us as we get more specific over time.
And it'll be interesting too, when we share a draft of a board goal with the board, who of course are watching all of our meetings, and as completely involved as the rest of us, they may have perspective too that's helpful, that may make us take a step back a little bit also. So I think that'll be a
Yeah, because
valuable
they're
part.
board goals, not committee goals.
Totally.
So, perfect.
All right, terrific. look at our timeline, keep us honest.
Yeah, I just, there's two standing items that I always include in these memorandums. One's a communication committee purpose, and the one is then just a timeline. So we're relatively have completed the timeline to date.
That's great.
Good.
Do we want to then probably have an updated timeline to go along with the goals with some measures as well? So,
Absolutely.
you know, to the extent that we could get a preliminary draft of that, understanding that, well, we have about a month, but I think it would be helpful to have sort of a timeline for next year with some high level measures.
Mhm.
No, it's been really, I'm proud of how we met kind of the timeline objectives. You know, it's some very good work that we received in the survey and, you know, through our discussion. So
I agree. I think we've gotten a lot done. And I think, you know, we've said many times, this is a working committee, right? Like we're all working through this process together. And I think we've gotten a lot of really great information pulled together that is going to help us with our next steps. Thank you guys for that.
In the spirit of transparency, I'll probably communicate this to the community itself with the whole survey again.
Yep.
Oh, the results
Yeah.
of the survey.
That they
Yeah,
can-
for sure.
Yeah, please.
You know, that'd be
That
great.
they can see that the
Yeah.
comments are recorded and so on and so forth.
The whole thing, all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just asking what you meant.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Um,
With thanks to the community for,
Yes, of course.
yes.
you know, because
All.
400 is a big
Particularly
number.
this time
Yeah,
of the year.
and staff, thanks to staff and the community. Okay, so
Maybe an invitation to continue to engage on this topic when we communicate it out.
sure. Okay, so to recap, what we're looking at for our next meeting, which again is scheduled for, what did I say, the 23rd?
23rd.
So we want to discuss any thoughts that we have from the survey results with a kind of a deeper look, as well as the inventory spreadsheet, and maybe any additions that with the examples we said, for example, about club information or athletic information, add a few of those.
Do you
In there.
want to do more specific dive next, or do you want us more focus on the goals next time, you think?
Board goals, are you saying, or?
Yeah.
I think we could, well, I definitely want to talk about board goals.
Yeah.
You think we've discussed enough? I didn't know if committee members felt like they wanted to spend a little more time with the survey results
Okay.
and have an opportunity to have discussion on that. Maybe
Okay.
it doesn't have to be a terribly involved discussion, but I think it might be helpful to have it on the agenda. Is that all right with you?
Jake, board goals?
No, just to
Oh, the survey?
revisit the results and the inventory spreadsheet, even just briefly in case.
Is there any guiding direction or feedback for the committee in the sense of what to bring back again?
Any other items that we feel we want to probe either in focus groups or any other data that we would like to try to pull together.
Yeah, I mean, you have a limited
By
opportunity.
that, I mean
to
like
reflect
click
on it.
through rates, like the
Yeah.
example I gave before.
Yeah.
And then, yes, I think a board goals draft would be terrific and an updated timeline looking forward.
Yep.
Things I have.
So Julie, I hear your point on reviewing survey results. Do you want admin to come to us with some examples of things that they're planning to look at in the focus groups?
I think that would be good, but I think we kind of have that from admin already. I was actually giving it more to the committee because we didn't have a ton of time
To
with a
reflect.
lot of information. So I think Marge and Alan did a nice job of capturing the things that we want to explore. And again, I just want us to have an opportunity on the agenda to add any other thoughts from the four of us or anybody else who reaches out with thoughts between now and then.
Okay.
Anything else? No?
If we have anything in policy, we'll bring it back. If we don't.
That's fair. All right, then I think I'll go to public comment. Michelle, do we have any?
Good morning. If anyone in person would like to participate? If anyone on Zoom would like to participate in public comment, please use the raised hand icon. Ms. Krista Carnes, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi all, how are you? Krista Carnes, 40 Fitch Avenue. And I just wanted to, communications is kind of what I like to do and what I do most days. So I was appreciative that this effort is being undertaken. I was a little appalled by some of the hate that was mentioned in some of the commentary. And I think that's eye-opening, and it's something that you all have to contend with. I do believe that you all represent us. You don't work for us, and you do have to take care of, everybody, all students, and the free and public education guidelines that, our country has settled long ago. And for that reason, communications are important, but, pandering to unreasonable demands and things like that, should not be a part of your job. One of the takeaways I got from the comments was people want everyone to do more work. You, our administration, our teachers. And while it's clear that there are some communication channels and, methods that can be addressed, I would hope that some of the board goals for next year would be to make some collective statements on what is within the purview of the Board of Education to tackle, holistically, in terms of content, in terms of, communications. There's certain things that you guys are required by, that the district is required by law to provide in our schools. And that kind of communication, might be helpful, at least just as a representative body for this town. In terms of, I think your focus groups are going to be really helpful. There's so many methods of communication that you all are talking about: email, social media, marketing, all this. There are people that are experts, and it may be a resource to hire someone who can have like a strategic bird's eye view in helping, because there are services that you could send the emails out and have them automatically shared to social channels without having to make a lot more content, because this is to do it the way people are used to from big brands and companies that they're used to seeing all the time. Like, it's a lot of work. I wonder also if you couldn't be creative and engage some of the students, at least maybe at the middle school and the high school level, in some sort of journalism club or something to that effect that might be able to help. I think there's a continuity issue that you want to consider, because so much of the communications does come from PTOs, and there's turnover there. So like every time you have to recreate the wheel, so if there is a platform that can be.
Krista, sorry to interrupt, but you're almost at time.
Okay, thanks. But I just appreciate you guys all doing this. And I think if you keep going, and there's a lot of people that want to help you, and I'm one of them. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else, Michelle?
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Jill, John, all in favor? Thanks.